When a billionaire's son tried to humiliate a waitress in front of a packed restaurant, she stood her ground and kicked him out. What happened next? A helicopter landed, and out stepped his father, with an offer that left the whole town speechless. It was a golden afternoon in Charleston, South Carolina, the kind of day when the sun draped everything in warmth and the sweet scent of jasmine danced on the breeze. The historic streets were alive with chatter and camera clicks, but inside the Golden Spoon Café, the air buzzed with something else. Comfort. The clinking of silverware, the hum of conversation, and the smell of fried catfish and buttermilk biscuits made it feel like home. Alyssa Johnson, 28, floated between tables with the rhythm of someone who had done this long enough to be both efficient and invisible, yet never unkind. Her braids were pinned neatly beneath her cap, and her smile, genuine and disarming, was the kind of smile that made regulars request her section. She didn't just take orders. She remembered names, stories, allergies, and whether someone liked extra lemon with their tea. She didn't expect to be disrespected. Not here. Not today. The door swung open, and in he walked. A young man, maybe 22 or 23, entered like a storm in designer sneakers. His clothes screamed money. Crisp white t-shirt under a black leather jacket, pants that probably cost more than Alyssa made in a week, and thick gold chains that jingled every time he moved. His sunglasses stayed on despite the shade indoors, as if removing them would dim his importance. He strutted, not walked, like the cafe was beneath him. He didn't glance at the host stand, didn't wait to be seated. He dropped himself into a corner booth and snapped his fingers, loud and sharp, like someone calling a dog. Heads turned. Alyssa approached, her notepad ready, professionalism intact. "Good afternoon, sir. Can I get you started with something to drink?" He didn't look up, just tossed out his words like scraps. "Steak, rare, and make it fast, sweetheart. I'm in a hurry." Her smile didn't fade, but it stiffened slightly. "Certainly, sir. Would you like anything to drink with that?" He finally looked at her and smirked. "I'll take whatever you'd recommend. You look like you know how to please people." There was a pause, a flicker of discomfort. Alyssa jotted down the order, nodded, and turned away. She'd handled worse. Sometimes you just had to keep it moving. But he didn't stop. As she passed by with another table's tea, she heard him again, loud enough for surrounding tables to hear, on purpose. "You ever think about doing something better with that pretty face of yours?" he called out. "Like modeling? Or maybe something more private?" The words hit like a slap. Disguise and charm, dipped in arrogance. Alyssa inhaled sharply through her nose. Keep it together. Breathe. She gave a tight smile to the couple she was serving, who looked at her with sympathetic eyes. She wasn't new to this. She had learned long ago that reacting to provocation often cost her more than it cost the man throwing the jabs. But the man kept digging. "You should smile more. It'd make those tips fatter, don't you think?" Alyssa turned toward him slowly. "Is there anything else I can get for you, sir?" He just winked. "Your number, maybe?" She walked away. Back in the kitchen, she leaned against the stainless steel counter for a moment, gripping it like a lifeline. One of the cooks, Darnell, saw the tension in her face. "You good, LYSS?" She forced a smile. "Yeah, just another tourist who thinks he owns the world." But inside, she wasn't fine. It wasn't just the disrespect. It was the entitlement. The entitlement to her time, her attention, her body, her space. And all because she wore an apron and smiled for a living. She returned to his table with his drink, a lemonade with fresh mint, one of her favorites to recommend. "Here you go, sir," she said, placing the glass gently on the table. Without missing a beat, he reached the glass, made an exaggerated move, and let it tip, spilling cold liquid down her front. Her apron soaked, and the chill rushed down her shirt. The man looked up with a crooked grin. "Oops, looks like you'll need to change. Maybe I can help you with that." The cafe froze. Forks stopped midair. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Every eye in the room turned toward the booth, toward Alyssa. Time seemed to slow. Alyssa looked down at the wet mess on her apron. Her chest rose and fell once, deeply. She took a breath. Not a shallow breath of restraint, but a full one. The kind you take before choosing yourself. She peeled the soaked apron off calmly, folding it in half with slow, steady hands. Then she met his eyes, really met them, not as a server, not as someone who had to smile through discomfort, but as a human being who had reached her limit. "No," she said clearly, her voice strong. "You don't get to treat people like this. Not here. Not me." He blinked, momentarily stunned that she dared to speak up. "You can finish your lemonade and leave. You're not welcome here." A wave of whispers spread through the café. A woman at the next table softly clapped. Another man nodded approvingly. The entitled grin slowly melted from the young man's face. "Do you know who I am?" he asked, the words dripping with disbelief and warning. Alyssa raised an eyebrow. "No, and I don't care." For the first time since he walked in, he looked small, uncertain, the armor of arrogance cracked. "I'm calling the owner," he said, reaching for his phone. Alyssa folded her arms. "Go ahead. I'll save you the number." Without raising her voice, Alyssa took a slow, steady breath, the kind that came not just from frustration, but from experience, from 6 long years of holding it together, from every time someone assumed she was less because she wore an apron, from every sweetheart, and Smile More hurled her way like compliments. This breath was different. It wasn't for keeping calm. It was for drawing the line. She stepped 1 inch closer to his table. Her tone was measured, deliberate. "Sir," she said, locking eyes with him, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The room, already hushed, went completely silent. The young man blinked, confused at first. "Excuse me." He actually laughed, like she had just told him a joke he didn't quite get. "Do you even know who I am?" Alyssa didn't flinch. She didn't lean back or bow down. "I don't care who you are," she replied coolly. "We don't tolerate disrespect here. Not to me, not to anyone on this staff. Now, please, leave before I call security." You could almost hear the power shift in the air. The arrogant smirk that had been plastered on his face began to falter. He glanced around the cafe, expecting support or at least a few raised eyebrows in his favor. But instead, he saw customers avoiding his eyes, some shaking their heads, others openly staring in disbelief. He straightened up in his seat, his pride bruised, his voice louder now, like volume could make him important again. "She's serious," he said with a bitter laugh, gesturing toward Alyssa like she was the one acting absurd. "I could buy this whole dump and fire every last one of you." The words hit the air with a clang, like a dropped tray. Alyssa remained perfectly still. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't blink. She didn't give him the satisfaction of reacting at all. What she did was simple. She turned her head to the side and caught the eyes of her manager, Raul, a stocky middle-aged man who had spent 2 decades working his way up from dishwasher to general manager. He had seen enough. He stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Alyssa, and gave her a single unmistakable nod. "We'll have your meal box up to go," Raul said firmly, his voice calm but unshakable. "Please step outside." The young man looked between them, this black woman and this Latino man, as if the world had flipped upside down and forgotten its place. "You'll regret this," he hissed, shoving his chair back with a loud scrape. His face was flushed a deep red, not just from embarrassment, but from something worse, entitlement denied. "You mess with the wrong family." He stormed toward the door, throwing open a glass with a dramatic shove that made the wind chimes rattle like applause. And speaking of applause, it came, first a single clap, then another, then a wave of it spread through the cafe like a ripple in still water. Not forced, not polite, genuine. People clapped because they saw something rare, someone standing up not just for herself, but for every service worker who'd ever been talked down to, snapped at, or objectified. Alyssa, her shoulders squared and her back straight, didn't bow, didn't take a curtain call. She simply returned to her station behind the counter, picked up a tray of drinks, and moved on to the next table. Like nothing happened, but it had happened, and it didn't go unnoticed. Mrs. Walters, an older regular who came in every Tuesday for tea and peach pie, called her over gently. "Alyssa, darling," she said, touching her hand softly. "I hope you know what you did today. That took guts." Alyssa smiled, this time a little slower. a little softer. "Thank you, ma'am." She continued her shift with professionalism, but beneath the surface, her heart was pounding, not out of fear, but from the adrenaline that comes after you finally say what you should have said 100 times before. When you finally choose dignity over a paycheck, respect over silence. Back in the kitchen, Raul placed a boxed-up steak on the back counter and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he looked over at her. "You okay?" Alyssa leaned against the prep table and let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "I will be," she said. "Thank you for backing me up." "Always," he said simply. But even as she tried to shake it off, she felt a twist in her stomach. Not fear, but intuition, because men like that didn't take no well. They didn't walk away quietly. And something in his words, "You'll regret this," echoed in her mind longer than it should have. Still, she brushed it off. She had tables to clean, orders to run, people to serve who actually appreciated being served. But the story wasn't over. Not even close. Out on the sidewalk, just 2 blocks away, the young man was pacing. Phone pressed his ear. "Yeah, Dad," he said, his voice shaking with a strange mix of fury and humiliation. "Some waitress just kicked me out of a restaurant. In front of everyone. She made a scene, said I was being disrespectful. You need to do something. This isn't just about me, it's about our name." There was a pause. Then a deep voice on the other end of the call responded slowly. "What restaurant?" The young man's eyes narrowed. "The Golden Spoon, downtown Charleston." Another pause, and then came the sound of helicopter blades in the distance, faint but growing louder. 2 hours had passed since the confrontation, and Alyssa had settled back into her rhythm, at least on the surface. But underneath her practiced smile, there was still a flicker of unease. She told herself it was nothing, just a spoiled rich kid throwing a tantrum. But in the back of her mind, the weight of his last words, "You'll regret this," lingered like a shadow that refused to leave. It was a slow moment in the afternoon lull. The lunch crowd had thinned, and the café hummed with a quieter kind of energy. Dishes being wiped down, silverware sorted, fresh pitchers of tea prepared for the next wave of customers. Then came the sound. At first, it was just a dull vibration, like thunder in the distance. But it grew louder. The windows rattled. Water glasses on tables trembled. People stopped mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. "What is that?" someone murmured. A young boy pressed his face to the glass and shouted, "It's a helicopter!" And it was. A sleek, matte black private helicopter descended slowly into a small parking lot adjacent to the cafe, its rotor blades slicing through the warm Charleston air. Napkins and leaves scattered in all directions, and several people inside the cafe instinctively ducked, unsure what was happening. A crowd began to form outside. Phones were pulled out. People started filming. The helicopter touched down with a thud, and from the side door stepped a man who looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine. Tall, composed. Every detail of him screamed power, from the sharp lines of his tailored navy suit to the way his silver hair was combed back with not a strand out of place. 2 bodyguards followed closely behind him, scanning the cafe entrance as if this were some kind of operation. The man didn't rush. He walked with a kind of unhurried certainty that made people step out his way. Inside the cafe, jaws dropped. Even Raul, the ever-calm manager, took a step forward from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel, eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. The glass door opened, and the man entered. Silence. You could hear the soft whir of the ceiling fan and the faint jazz playing on the speaker system. Every eye in the place turned toward him. He paused just inside the doorway, letting his gaze sweep across the room like a general taking stock of his battlefield. Then, with a deep, smooth voice that carried without needing to be loud, he asked, "Who is Alyssa?" The moment felt unreal, like a scene from a movie. Alyssa stood frozen behind the counter for a split second, uncertain whether to step forward or hide in the back room. She straightened her spine. "That's me," she said cautiously, stepping out from behind the counter. Her voice was steady, but her heart pounded in her chest. The man's face softened. He stepped forward and extended a hand. "I'm William Langston. CEO of Langston Enterprises. Gasps echoed quietly around the room. Langston Enterprises, one of the biggest private holding companies in southeastern U.S. real estate, shipping, luxury hotels, even minor stakes in sports teams. This man wasn't just rich, he was legacy. He continued, "That boy you kicked out earlier is my son." The silence grew even deeper. Some people stopped breathing. Others whispered, "Oh my God," under their breath. Alyssa's eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't shake his hand just yet. She had no idea what was coming next. An apology? A threat? A bribe? "I see," she said simply, standing her ground. "And why are you here?" William Langston dropped his hand slowly and offered a small, genuine smile. It caught Alyssa off guard. "I came to thank you." More murmurs rippled through the cafe. "Excuse me?" Alyssa asked, blinking. He took a deep breath. "My son has grown up with everything handed to him. Wealth, connections, immunity. And clearly," he glanced around, "he started to believe that entitles him to treat others however he pleases." A few people at the tables nearby nodded slightly. "I've had board members, investors, even my own staff afraid to discipline him. You're the first person in years to put him in his place. And you did it with grace. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't curse. You didn't back down." Alyssa stood still, unsure whether she was being praised or tested. "I wasn't trying to prove a point," she said quietly. "I was just doing my job and protecting myself." William nodded slowly. "Exactly. And that's why I'm here, to offer you a job." More gasps. Raoul audibly muttered, "Wait, what?" Alyssa tilted her head. "A job." He smiled. "At Langston Hotels. I need someone like you managing staff at our flagship property here in Charleston. Someone who understands service and respect. You've clearly mastered both." Alyssa blinked again. I've never worked in a hotel. I'm not trained for." "You've already demonstrated everything that matters," he said. "I'll cover training. Full salary. Benefits. Travel if you want it. You just say the word." The cafe was dead silent. Alyssa felt like the floor had shifted beneath her. In the back of the restaurant, someone whispered, "Girl, take it." But Alyssa didn't answer right away. Her heart was a whirlwind. Part of her wanted to scream, yes, and walk out with her head held high. Another part of her thought about the family she had here. The co-workers who had become friends, the regulars she'd known for years, the rhythm of a life she had built from the ground up. But above all, she thought about what it meant to be seen, to be valued not because of her connections or her name, but because she stood for something. And then she smiled, not for a tip, not for a customer, but for herself. Alyssa stood frozen, her hands folded in front of her apron, heart pounding in her chest. The entire cafe was still hanging on every word, every breath. It wasn't every day that a billionaire in a tailored suit walked into a small southern restaurant and offered a waitress a job. And yet, here she was, standing face to face with William Langston himself, the man whose son she had just kicked out hours earlier. William's voice broke the silence, calm but laced with something deeper, something human. "I heard everything," he said, folding his hands behind his back. "The comments, the arrogance, the disrespect. I have security footage, and one of my team members was here earlier. I know exactly what happened." Alyssa's eyes widened slightly. Her stomach tensed. She hadn't expected surveillance or informants. But then again, rich men like him rarely walk blind. William sighed, a heavy breath that seemed to come not just from his lungs, but from somewhere deeper in his chest. "I raise him better than that," he said quietly. "I'm ashamed of how he acted, deeply ashamed." There was a pause. Alyssa blinked, unsure where this was going. Was this a performance? An attempt to fix his public image? Or was this man sincere? William looked around the cafe again, then back at her. "You see," he said, "I didn't grow up with wealth. Not even close. I started as a busboy in a little diner outside Columbia. Wore the same 2 pairs of shoes until the soles gave out. Took orders, cleaned grease traps, worked double shifts when someone called in sick." A few older patrons nodded, recognizing that kind of hustle. "I know what it's like to be looked down on," he continued. To be ignored. To be treated like furniture. There to serve, not to be seen. I never forgot that. Alyssa's guard softened, just slightly. His eyes, once sharp and calculating, now held something closer to regret. What you did today, William said, that took courage, dignity, leadership. Most people would have swallowed the insult, laughed off the harassment, smiled through it. You didn't. You drew a line, and you did it without raising your voice or losing your professionalism. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a sleek, navy blue envelope with a silver Langston Enterprises logo embossed on the front. It gleamed in the afternoon light, like it didn't belong in this world of coffee rings and ketchup bottles. This is a formal job offer, he said, holding it out to her. Alyssa hesitated before slowly taking it. Her fingers brushed against the smooth paper as she opened the flap and pulled out the contents. Her eyes scanned the bold header at the top. Director of Hospitality Training, Langston Enterprises. I want you to join our company, William said. Specifically, to help us lead a new training program we're launching across all our hotels and restaurants. We need someone who knows what real service is, not just scripted greetings, but heart, human connection, standards that matter. Alyssa's jaw tightened, still trying to process what she was reading. It's a full-time position, he continued. Full salary. Relocation package if you choose to move. We'll pay for leadership training. You'll be helping train and mentor hundreds of young professionals. People just starting out like you once did. And yes, he paused with a small smile. Hopefully, one of those trainees will be my son. A stunned laugh escaped from someone near the counter. But William didn't seem embarrassed. If anything, he was hopeful. Alyssa looked up slowly. Why me? She asked, her voice small but steady. William met her gaze. Because people like you don't just work hard, he said. You raise the standard. Every time you stand up for yourself, every time you refuse to tolerate disrespect, every time you lead by example, you're setting a tone that others will follow. And that's the kind of energy I want in my company. A lump formed in Alyssa's throat. No one had ever seen her like this before. Not as someone worth investing in, worth promoting, worth believing in. She had always been just a waitress. Not in her own eyes, but in the eyes of too many people who never looked past the apron. For years, she had watched wealthy men in expensive suits toss credit cards on the table without eye contact. She had smiled through condescension, tolerated rude behavior, and worked herself to the bone without asking for anything in return but respect. And now here was one of those men, not belittling her, but offering her a seat at a bigger table. She looked down at the envelope in her hands. Her name printed clearly on the top. Her future, suddenly wide open. A moment passed. Then another. Can I think about it? She asked finally, her voice a little hoarse. William nodded, not offended in the least. Of course. Take all the time you need. Talk to your family. Talk to your manager. This isn't just a job. It's a shift. And I know that. She nodded. Thank you. He extended his hand again, and this time she took it. His grip was firm, respectful. No ego. Just a quiet sense of two people who had lived very different lives, now meeting in a moment that felt strangely equal. As he turned to leave, William paused near the door and glanced back over his shoulder. For what it's worth, Alyssa, you made me proud today. And I don't say that often. And with that, he stepped outside, followed by his guards. The roar of the helicopter soon filled the air again, and moments later, it lifted off into the Charleston sky, leaving behind a restaurant full of stunned customers, a manager with wide eyes, and a waitress holding an envelope that just might change her life. Alyssa stood motionless for a long moment. Then she smiled, not because someone told her to, but because something inside her finally felt seen. Exactly 1 month after the confrontation at the Golden Spoon Café, Alyssa stood in the middle of her new apartment in Atlanta, barefoot on hardwood floors, coffee mug in hand, watching the sun rise over the city skyline. The light poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting her walls in gold and orange. She still couldn't quite believe this was her life. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. Her name was on the lease. Her name was also on the doors of the Langston Enterprises headquarters downtown, on a sleek glass plaque that read, Alyssa Johnson, Director, Respect First Initiative. Her story had gone viral within days of the incident. A customer had recorded part of the altercation and uploaded it online. The video exploded. Major news outlets picked it up. Social media praised her strength and composure. Hashtags like hashtag stand with Alyssa and hashtag dignity matters trended for days. People from all over the country, waitresses, retail workers, nurses, security guards, wrote to her, thanking her for standing up, for not backing down, for saying what so many had wanted to say for years. She had become something she never asked to be, a voice, a symbol of what quiet resistance could look like. But Alyssa never saw herself as a hero. She had simply reached a limit and chosen herself. Now, she was building something bigger, something that might make a real difference. The Respect First program had been her idea, born out of the moment she stood in a café and told a wealthy man's son to leave. It focused on 3 core pillars: empathy, accountability, human dignity. It was designed to train everyone, from servers to executives, on how to lead with humility and treat others with respect, regardless of their position. And the very first training class was about to begin. She arrived early that morning at the Langston corporate building, a sleek, modern tower with clean lines and tall glass windows. She wore a navy blue blazer and soft beige pants, professional, sharp, but undeniably her. Her braids were pulled into a bun. She looked calm, grounded, unshakable. Inside the training room, she arranged chairs into a semicircle, placed notepads on each seat, and wrote her favorite quote on the whiteboard at the front of the room. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you give. One by one, the trainees filed in. New hires, junior managers, frontline staff from various hotels and restaurants. And then he walked in, the billionaire's son. No fanfare, no chains, no designer sunglasses. He wore a gray hoodie, simple jeans, and carried a plain black notebook. His shoulders were lower now. His eyes didn't scan the room for attention. They searched the floor. He looked human. A few people whispered, recognizing him from a viral video. Alyssa didn't flinch. She handed him a notepad like she had for everyone else. No sarcasm, no coldness, just equal treatment. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. As the room settled, Alyssa stepped forward and welcomed everyone. Her voice was calm but confident. "I'm not here to lecture you," she began. "I'm here to help you see people differently and to see yourselves more clearly." She let the silence settle. Then she walked toward the whiteboard and slowly turned to face them all. "The way you treat people when you think no one's watching," she said softly, "that's who you really are." The room went completely still. No scribbling, no murmuring, just stillness. And then, slowly, eyes turned to the young man in the hoodie. But he didn't shrink. He looked up, straight at Alyssa, and for the first time, he listened, not because someone was threatening him, not because he was embarrassed, but because somewhere in the past month, something inside him had cracked open. Something about the humiliation, the silence from his father afterward, the sudden, painful fall from privilege, had changed him. He had been sent here by force, sure, but what he was now realizing was that he needed to be here. And Alyssa, to her credit, didn't rub it in. She didn't gloat. She didn't even address him directly. She let the lesson speak louder than any scolding ever could. Over the next 3 weeks, she taught the class the way she learned to live. With integrity, with patience, with kindness when possible, but firmness when needed. She talked about empathy as a skill, not a feeling. She taught active listening. She role-played customer conflict scenarios and gave space for everyone to reflect on how they handled stress, bias, and power. And through it all, the young man stayed. He never missed a day. He took notes. He asked questions. And by the final session, he was one of the first to arrive. At the end of the course, each participant was asked to give a short reflection. When it was his turn, he stood up, he cleared his throat, and looked directly at Alyssa. "I used to think leadership was about control," he began. "About getting what you want. being the loudest voice in the room. But this showed me it's about service, about respect, about seeing people, really seeing them. And I didn't see anyone before, not even myself. He paused, then said one word she never expected from him. Thank you. A few people clapped. Not loudly, but meaningfully. Alyssa gave a single nod. You're welcome, she said. And with that, the training concluded. Later that evening, Alyssa sat on her balcony with a cup of tea, legs tucked beneath her, watching the lights of Atlanta flicker like stars that had come down to rest on Earth. She thought of Charleston, of the golden spoon, of spilled water, snapped fingers, and a moment where everything could have gone wrong, but didn't. She had chosen herself that day, and that choice had opened a door not just for her, but for others too. She smiled into the night, not for a customer, not for a tip, just for her.